So, let's talk about the 20th century. Was it humanity's greatest leap forward, or was it our most terrifying fall from grace? It's a huge question, right? Well, according to the writer A.C. Ward, the answer is both. We're going to dive into his incredible analysis of a century that, well, it completely reshaped our world, for better, and you guessed it, for worse.
Okay, so Ward basically frames the entire century as this massive, glaring contradiction. On one hand, you have this incredible scientific revolution that gave us absolute marvels. I mean, the internal combustion engine, airplanes, nuclear power, things that gave us mass mobility and changed everything. But then, on the other hand, those exact same technologies, they're what enabled the mass slaughter of two world wars and created the threat of, total annihilation. It was this bizarre story of progress just rocketing forward, while at the same time we saw this shocking moral and spiritual collapse.
So to really get a handle on the 20th century revolt, we've got to rewind a bit and look at the world it was rebelling against. Ward takes us back to the Victorian era, which he says wasn't so much about any single belief, but more about this powerful, almost unquestioning attitude of acceptance. Yeah, in Ward's view, the Victorians really saw themselves living in a house built on these four absolutely unshakable foundations. You had the home, the Constitution, the empire, and the Christian religion. They didn't just think these were good ideas, they saw them as permanent, like final truths about how the world was supposed to work. It was this deep-seated belief that these things were here to stay, forever. And wow, H.G. Wells just nailed this new, unsettling feeling perfectly. He said the world ceased to be a home and became the mere site of a home. Think about that. Suddenly, that feeling of having a stable, permanent place in the universe, it was just gone. The world started to feel like a temporary campsite, not some final destination. And that loss of certainty, it was a massive shock to the system. So, what happened? What changed? Well, a whole new way of thinking started to take hold. You could call it the interrogative habit. Suddenly, nothing was sacred anymore. Everything was up for debate, open to question. This, right here, was the great 20th century revolt against all those old certainties. And one of the key figures leading the charge was George Bernard Shaw. There's this line from his play Major Barbara that was basically a trumpet call for a whole generation. The character says, "Society will scrap its old steam engines, but it won't scrap its old prejudices and morals." The message was crystal clear. Hey, why are we so eager to update our technology but so terrified to question our morals, our religions, our politics? Shaw's whole thing was, question everything, examine it, test it. But, this call to question everything, it created a really deep split in society. For some people, it was this thrilling, invigorating liberation from all the old superstitions. But for a lot of others, it was absolutely terrifying. It felt like standing on a rock you thought was eternal, only to feel it just crumble to sand beneath your feet. And that crumbling of certainty, it left behind this huge spiritual vacuum. And you can see this split, this schism, so clearly in the world of art. As society itself fractured, literature basically split down the middle, taking two completely different paths. Each one was a reaction to the collapse of that old world. So this split basically created two very different literary camps. On one side, you've got the Fabian group, think Shaw and Wells. These guys were social reformers. Their motto was art for life's sake. They really believed literature should be out there, engaging with everybody, and inspiring actual social and political change. But then, on the other side, you had the super influential Bloomsbury group with people like Virginia Woolf. Their whole principle was art for art's sake. They kind of retreated from the common person, writing really complex, introspective stuff for a small intellectual elite. And this comment about James Joyce's masterpiece, Ulysses, it just perfectly captures the attitude of this new intellectual elite. The writer praises Joyce for never betraying the authority of intellect to the hydra-headed rabble of the mental underworld. Whoa. There's a real contempt for the average reader baked into that, isn't there? And this is Ward's point. With books like Ulysses, literature basically abandoned the common person. It retreated into this private intellectual fortress that only a few could enter. All right, so after the absolute devastation of two world wars, a totally new world starts to emerge, and Ward has a name for it. It's not the century of the common man, like so many had hoped. Instead, he calls it the age of mass man, a new kind of society shaped by powerful new forces and a completely different set of values. So you have the rise of the welfare state, right? And the goal was pretty simple:
take away the constant economic stress by providing social security for everyone. And you know what? Materially, it was a huge success. It brought all these incredible benefits. But here's the strange part. The happiness that everyone expected to follow, it just never showed up. Instead, this weird paradox emerged. A widespread mood of what Ward calls sullen discontent settled over society. People's basic needs were met, but that spiritual vacuum we talked about, it was still there and it was still empty. And guess what? Stepped into that big vacuum of purpose? A powerful new force: mass consumerism. Ward argues that advertisers basically became the new high priests of society. They were experts at tapping into our deepest, most subconscious desires. They weren't just selling you soap. They were selling you love. They weren't just selling you a car. They were selling you status. And all of this fueled a culture of keeping up with the Joneses and what was called conspicuous waste, something that, before then, was really only for the super rich. So this new society, affluent, but spiritually kinda empty, it produced another really strange phenomenon: the youth revolt. I mean, think about it. If your basic needs are all met, what exactly are you rebelling against? What's the cause?
Well, enter the beatniks. This was a whole subculture that was all about professing total disgust with society. They tried to contract out of it completely through nonconformity. But Ward has a pretty sharp critique of this. He basically saw them as social parasites because they were still benefiting from the very society they claimed to despise. I mean, after all, somebody had to grow the food they ate and build the cars they hitchhiked in, right?
Okay, so after all that, where does this leave us? What's the final verdict? Well, Ward's final assessment is pretty critical. He looks at the cultural landscape around the middle of the 20th century and basically asks, was the price of all this progress just too high? And kind of ironically, Ward uses a quote from the great rebel himself, Bernard Shaw, to diagnose the problem of this new age. Shaw wrote, "Without good manners, human society is intolerable and impossible." Ward saw this widespread contempt for authority, for tradition, for just basic civility as the real price of the 20th century revolt, the rise of cheap satire and what he called barbaric loudishness in pop culture. For him, these were all just symptoms of a society that had completely lost its way. And that really leaves us with the central, nagging question of Ward's entire analysis. The 20th century absolutely shattered the Victorian world of order and certainty, no doubt about that. But in breaking all the old rules, did it actually create a better, more meaningful game? Or, in its frantic rush to tear down the past, did it just forget how to play at all?